This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Right. Good morning, Kelly, and good morning, Jason Stoddard.
Good morning.
Morning.
How are you guys doing?
Fantastic.
So our guest here, Jason, is the Director of School Safety and Security at Charles County Public Schools. And I think there's a kind of special reason why we have him on here on the podcast. Kelly, if you want to kind of highlight that a little bit of the organization you guys are both a part of.
Yeah, so through actually a lot of hard work with many people who are focused on making our schools safer, an nonprofit organization called Zero Now created the National Council of School Safety Directors, which Jason is the inaugural chairperson for that. I was asked to sit on that council as well. So I'm going to let Jason say a little bit more, but this is sort of the coming out party for that organization and what we want to do. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get into some conversation. How's that? Just say
some stuff.
So good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor to be here with you guys, and looking forward to our good conversation. As you said, my name is Jason Stoddard. I am the Director of Safety and Security for the Charles County Public Schools. We're located about 20 minutes south of Washington, D.C. I am also as Kelly said, the inaugural chair of the National Council of School Safety and Security Directors, or School Safety Directors. We had our initial press release on April 30th, where we did a webinar press release announcing the organization and kind of planting our flag and what we're trying to do here. And moving forward, we have some pretty good goals moving forward of what we're going to do. And we look forward to working with all of our partners to include as many of the school systems as we can to try and put a certified school safety director into every school district in the state in the country.
Nice. Yeah, and Kelly's been kind of talking me through this and talking about it, and it's really cool stuff.
But lots of work. The seeds were planted for this in about in January, actually, in a Zero Now meeting, and a group of us came together in February, and then we sit here at the beginning of May, where we are with a press release and a national coverage, and have been contacted by a number of different media outlets, doing some podcasts and things like that, just trying to get the good word out, what we're here to do. And these professionals that are in this organization are the boots on the ground that do this job every day. And prior to our existence, there was nobody that was really representing them or providing any direction on what a certification looked like, or sitting at state houses and talking about, hey, look, these are the realities of what schools are facing every day, not just what we see in the news or in other media sources.
Yeah, I've seen the group of people that are a part of this, and you guys are, I want to say, like, stacked. Like, you guys got some really great people in that group. So yeah,
and we did that on purpose. Looking at there are legends such as Kelly that have been doing this for a number of years. If you don't bring those folks along that have done this and that have that experience, you're cutting your nose off despite your face.
Well, I've never been called a legend before. I've been called infamous. But thanks for that. But so I guess, there's really a lot of good people who are working to this, and I was honored to be asked to be part of it. And it's, I guess, for our audience, what problem are you actually trying to solve with this?
So as we look at the school security space, it's an ever growing space. It is something that some school districts that were a little bit more leading edge hired school safety directors years ago, or they had emergency management folks inside of their schools. However, once Parkland happened, you started to see a shift nationwide in more and more legislative bodies and schools looking to hire school safety and security directors, and it's somewhat spread across the United States. As we did research to try and understand the exact scope of this problem, we were only able to find 2 states in the country that require school systems to have school safety and security directors at the district level. There's only 32 states that have some sort of state government program or office that oversees school safety or provides guidance or grant funding. This is something that, there are 14,000 school districts in the United States, and we educate about 50 million kids a day. And these are America's national treasures. So we need to be doing everything that we can do to make sure that our kids are in a safe environment so that they can excel. As you look at the hodgepodge of what school safety looks like, a vast majority of people think school safety starts and stops with an active shooter, active assailant style threat. Truth be told, there is really no great definition of what school safety is, or what a school safety director covers or should be responsible for, what it looks like to become one, how you transition from civilian world, whether it's law enforcement or emergency management or fire EMS, or even transitioning from the classroom or as an administrator into a director of safety and security. How do you do that? I know I transitioned just like you did from law enforcement into this role. This is a whole different language. It's a whole different, the K-12 space doesn't do very well when they're being told what to do by somebody who's just walked through the door and they see them as nothing but an outsider. So you have to learn how to build those relationships. You have to learn how to speak education. And you got to learn what all the regulations are. The regulations look completely different here than anywhere else. So that was part of this. And I think that the idea for this, for something like this, an organization like this, was there at every school safety conference where there were school safety directors since in the last 10 years at the bars and as people walked around the expo. Wouldn't it be great if somebody did this? Wouldn't it be great if somebody took this bull by the horns and ran with it? The other thing that we really looked at was, the school security space is mostly taxpayer funded. Well, it's all taxpayer funded at this point, and it's about a $2 to $3 billion business that's pretty much unregulated. And in many cases, we have there's nobody that the states are calling from within inside of the schools to talk about what the truth is that's happening every day. What are the things that we need every day to make our kids safer? The sensationalizing of active shooter style attacks has led to a vast majority of products that are that have something to do with response to active shooter style attacks. Without it being regulated, there's a lot of potential for wasted money. The other thing that we found is in many school districts, there's a number of different people that are doing, quote unquote, the safety thing. You may have IT that oversees your cameras. You may have facilities that oversees your door locks. You may have a life safety office that oversees the video management software of the cameras that IT oversees. You may have a school administrator who's writing policy for their school, but it's not comprehensive, nor is it consistent across the entire district. That's where we believe that somebody that is basically the captain of the team. The best way that I can describe this is the fact that it's much like we have a bunch of players, but we have no captain in many organizations. So I think that the logical thing to look at is who operationalizes and owns school safety at every school. And I think when you really sit back and look at it, parents give their kids to us for 6 to 7 hours a day. They expect their kids are going to be safe. There's laws that say that we will do things that are reasonable to keep kids safe. And we have an athletic director in just about every high school. We have somebody in every district that's in charge of teaching and learning. You have somebody in every district that's in charge of the principals. And those people are experts in their field. And schools need to have somebody who brings a specific expertise and professionalism to this to keep our kids safe, because that's what our responsibility is and what the expectation is.
So you see that we see it quite a bit. Ethan will attest to this in our, obviously we're a business, we're a company that deals with solutions for this. But we'll see where the administrators that we're conversing with, we're talking to, trying to find out what their challenges are. I don't know how many times we've heard, I'm not an expert here. This is not my job. I just got assigned this, right? So you say two states. I think there's probably a couple more. They probably call it something else. Missouri is one of those states that they require two, they call them safety coordinators for each district. But they don't have any idea what it is they're supposed to do. And they rely on experts. So let's talk about the expert label and maybe just a little. I don't want to get down into the weeds about who's an expert and who's not an expert, because I have my own opinion on that, obviously. Because what I think we're really trying to do is create experts. I don't like the word expert. I know you don't like the word expert, and so forth. So why don't we talk a little bit about that safety expert and why our schools are so vulnerable to that type of label?
So I think that you're right. I dislike the word expert. It is overused. It's much like being America's nation's leading this. How did you get that title, and who identified you as? What I would best classify of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a professional core competency for what our school safety director should be trained in. As we have had these conversations with all the folks that are on the founding council who bring a number of years of experience to this, we find that we're all doing a little bit different stuff. We're all responsible for a few different things, but there is a core competency that we need to drive that experience and knowledge with. And I think that's where we really want to sit. We have people that walk through the door, what I would classify as vendor-based experts that are experts in their solution, and they will tell you how their solution works and how it can integrate into their system. Well, there are very, very few school safety experts, because this is, quite frankly, a pretty new field. This is not something, there's been some pretty progressive organizations like the Littleton, Colorado, prior to 1999 had a school safety and security director. It was probably unheard of then. And it's only grown since then, but we've seen that true explosion over the last 5 years, and it needs to grow even more than that. So I don't think that there are any quote unquote experts in school safety and security. There's a lot of professionals. There's a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge about what goes on, but I don't know how we get to that term expert. It's overused. We all know language is important, but what has really been shocking to me in some of the discussions that we've had has been this idea that schools should let anyone other than the school itself drive their school safety and security, drive their climate and culture. And what I mean by that is in many school districts across the United States, you see them say, "Oh, we have a school safety and security director. It's our SRO." For the most part, the SRO doesn't work for the school, so there's a lot of different issues there. And they're law enforcement officers. They have a whole different thing that they're responsible for. They're not that we don't want our law enforcement officers to know or to be responsible for understanding the school's purchasing and procurement processes in order to purchase cameras or to purchase magnetic door card readers. So you have that, and then you also have we have school safety experts that sold us this enterprise program that integrates with all this stuff. It does our cameras, our VMS, it does our refrigerator temperatures, it does all of these other things in the school district. Well, those vendors are much needed because they need to know what their solution is and how their solution fits into everything else. If a school doesn't employ somebody that is what I will classify as a first responder that they own, they're losing the opportunity, and they're passing the buck on who's in charge of their safety of their kids every day.
But don't you think that's the way it is? Because they have a director for everything, right? And they want the superintendent wants somebody else to handle that. They just want somebody else to handle it. And when we look at, you touched on it just briefly, some of the people who are responsible for school safety and technology and those types of things, it runs the gamut. It could be a facilities guy. It could be IT. I've seen the business director. I've seen the communications director. I've seen all of these different things. And they like to delegate. The other problem that we see, and I totally want the schools to drive their own safety. The problem is the culture within the schools says, and I'll give you an example of this, but the culture says we don't do anything in school safety without a mandate for the most part, right?
Literally just got something the other day about that.
Yeah. So, we put out an email asking what some schools are doing regarding Alyssa's laws. And we got a response. We don't care. It's not mandated in our state. What's the intent of Alyssa's law? Let's look at that. Not the fact that you have a mandate. What are they trying to do? And is that beneficial to our schools?
So I think and this is where an organization such as ours has to interface with so many other organizations like superintendents organizations, school board organizations, things like that, to all work together to get that common operating picture. And I was out at AASA and we did a presentation in front of, there was 4,000 superintendents there, and we had a number of superintendents that sat in our PD. And the one thing that I asked them was, can you name me a superintendent in your area that's been fired in the last 5 years for a failure of a test score? And for the most part, the answer is no. I live in the DMV, and I can name 3 superintendents in the DMV in the last 5 years that have all been fired, and they've all been fired because of school safety and security issues, or let go, or terminated, or whatever else. And I think that is something that we have to bring to light. Superintendents have 1,001 things going on every day, and to be able to say, I've got an expert, or I've got a professional that I've hired that I trust to do this job, to lead me through this, I think takes something off of their desk. I also think, quite frankly, it also gives them the plausible deniability to have somebody between them and the actual decisions that are going on for the preparation and the response to any type of public safety or a crisis in a school, because they should be one step removed. It's no different than when we were in law enforcement. The last place you ever wanted the chief was on the scene of a crisis, because they shouldn't be making those decisions.
Well, because there's a lot of things that there's a lot of reasons that.
Yeah, but you see what I mean. They get in the way. They're not in the right spot. They're not operating. Let's put it this way: they're not operating at the appropriate altitude that we need them operating at. We need them sitting with the commissioners or with your higher ups and your elected officials, taking those people away from our command posts while we're operating in a crisis environment in any place. And I think that's where we really have to have that conversation. That, look, in 2024. Superintendents aren't being fired for test scores. Everybody understands the problems with the tests and the test scores and why kids aren't excelling, and with COVID and everything else. What they are being fired for are the major security lapses that are occurring, that may include human resource issues, the employee issues, or that may include something like things that were hidden from the public or not being transparent about. Most of those issues are school safety issues. And you need somebody. Our school system experienced a horrific event that involving a former employee, and there was nobody to help my former superintendent walk through how that looks, what we needed to learn from it, how can we prevent it, doing that after action review of everything that you're doing to get better. Tragedies and crises are going to happen. Most of them can be prevented, but when they do happen, you have to be able to go back, and somebody's got to lead the process of how do we get better. And we owe that to our kids, to our staffs, and to our communities.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But here's the deal, and I agree. We should hire these safety directors to lead all that, but the superintendent can't relinquish the responsibility for that safety. He's the one there, right? So he can't just set it and forget about it. And I've been at many conferences with high level school officials where I talked to them about safety, and they said, I have a guy for that. Okay, where are you at with this? Right. And you talked earlier, touched on policies, writing good policy, right? And while safety directors they should be drafting policy and stuff, it's still do you have as we know, policy should be driving everything you do in the safety world, right? And if you don't have policy, you need to get policy. As much as I hate policies, you need policies. They drive everything that you do, and they allow people, they give authority to people, they give responsibilities and expectations to people. And I know where we want to be, but I also understand where we're at, right? And that's going to be the challenge, is building this incrementally so that we can bring everyone along, because there are so many people here, not just law enforcement and other first responders, but the school administration, building administration, your safety teams, your threat assessment teams, all of these people.
So I actually had this conversation yesterday with another one of our colleagues, and I think the question is who's doing it now? Who's leading that conversation before this organization started? And nobody was. And how do we eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And I think by providing and by partnering with organizations that represent school administration, faculty or facilities, unions, and elected school boards, I think we can bring forth the information that's needed to bring this to the level that it needs to be brought to. One of the things is, that we've been working on is, where does this, if you're just now hiring a school safety and security director, where should they sit in the hierarchical chart of your organization? And that varies drastically, even in the state of Maryland, that requires people to, or the school systems to have a school safety and security director. Mm-hmm. I used to report directly to my superintendent. New superintendent came in, shuffled things up a little bit, and now I'm one level down. I don't think that that's bad. I don't think that, a school safety and security director reporting to facilities is ideal, but I also don't think that's bad either. Where I think that we get into trouble is those soft skills that we need. We talked a little bit about them before, somebody transitioning from outside of education into education, or somebody who's been in education that's now being transferred or promoted to a safety and security spot. The ability to understand the importance of having unencumbered access to the superintendent. And that takes relationships. It also takes a lot of leading up to the different levels that are in between you and the superintendent, depending on where you sit in that organization. And it's important that, while I don't work directly for the super, I can email her, or I can walk directly into her office, or I have her cell phone number. And also, as long as I back brief my boss is happy.
Yeah.
But that takes a lot of emotional and maturity in a leadership position to understand that. In many cases, it's got to be trained. It's also got to be. So when I'm transitioning from law enforcement into this position, one of the things that when I took this job that I talked to the then superintendent about was, where am I going to report? And that needs to be a valid question that's asked, because when you're taking the job, if they say, well, you're going to report to, you're 4 levels below the superintendent, and you're going to report to the third lowest, or the third in command of facilities, how much are you going to be able to accomplish without a lot of different layers that have a very high amount of emotional intelligence and leadership capability to understand the access to you need. So we also have to be our own advocates when it comes to that, especially when we're walking through the door and we have a new organization, or you're taking a job that existed. And when you ask that question, well, where would I report? Well, what didn't work about this where it sits now? What can we do to maybe change that as we move forward?
Right. And I'm not saying, well, I guess I'm going to. I don't have a problem with people sitting below the superintendent. What I do have a problem with is when structure is created that is dependent upon the specific people who are there, right? So if you create structure and you have great people in that structure, your boss doesn't, as long as your boss is briefed and understands what the communication and why and all that stuff, and your superintendent is good with it, then that works for you. There's zero problem there. But it only works for you if everyone is on the same sheet of music there. Whereas if you look at the ICS structure, where do they put safety in the ICS structure?
Well, it's a command staff position that reports directly to the incident commander.
That's right. And if we are going to create a structure where safety is paramount, we talk to schools all the time about what's your top priority? Safety, right? That's one of our top priorities. Although their actions don't say that.
Yeah.
They don't give a budget to it. They don't really understand what it is. All different things like this. But if you want to have an opportunity to build a very strong and sustainable structure for safety and a culture for safety, then that has to sit at that cabinet level. And because when they're in that and somebody says, hey, we're going to do this math fair, this math decathlon or whatever it is, right? We're going to do that. And everyone says, oh, that's going to be a great event. We're going to get people from all over the state and we're going to come in and have this academic decathlon or whatever you want to call it. Well, their safety concerns are. If that has to or doesn't get down because the facilities guy who's sitting at that table says, that doesn't bother me. It's on a weekend. I don't care. And then a week before, the safety director who sits underneath him says, hey, what's this big event that we're having at the high school? Yeah. Oh, I forgot to tell you about that. So if we're going to have that, create the structure that allows for that to occur regardless of who's there. And I remember we did it all the time in the sheriff's department when they changed structures. It was because of a particular person. And you sit there and go, well, that's only working because you have the right people in there right now. You have to have a strong lieutenant or a strong sergeant or whatever for that to work. And if it doesn't work, then you're going to change the structure again. But if you make the structure solid from the beginning, then you can have that ability. It doesn't matter as long as you have somebody there that you're more likely than not. You're going to have failures, but they're going to be far less.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. What I would say is that was the school system that I came to, where there was 6 different people that were doing some function of security, and having that cross collaboration and getting outside the silos and your organizational bureaucracy is difficult. However, what I have found working in my organization, and I think it parrots in a lot of different other organizations, what I found is that they don't know what they don't know. So when that facilities thing happens, they don't even remember that, oh, wait, there could be a safety and security component there. Mm-hmm. And this is where, again, I believe that through NCSSD and the certification process and the classes and things like that, being able to tell people, hey, look, these are the things that you need to think about. These are the things that we need to be leading from our position up to try and make sure that people understand the importance of this. Because I've been here for 6 years, and even though I would say that the Charles County Public Schools had a very good safety and security footprint prior to me arriving, there was not a lot of cross-pollination about, hey, this is going on or this is going on. And in large organizations, that's difficult at best. And our organization isn't huge, but we have 4,000 employees and 41 schools. But I think ultimately, if we take the approach of being able to train that person who's aspiring to do that job and to provide them with the information of things like, hey, here's some things that you might want to think about asking. Here's some ideas and some concepts to put you in front of administration and staff more often. A great example of this is and I'm sure there's other people in the United States that are doing it, but our office was tasked with running the COVID response. It didn't fit anywhere else, so it came to me. And apparently I had stayed at the Holiday Inn Express the night before COVID happened, and I became the expert. So we did everything from what was starting as policy to, by the time we were done, we were writing policy, doing PPE training, PPE acquisition, distribution, vaccinations, and then it all culminated with contact tracing and everything else. So from that point, as we remember, during COVID, the guidance from the federal government for K-12 changed almost daily.
Yep.
So we put into place a weekly conference call to go along with our policy, our SOP that we wrote for COVID, because of that constant changing of the guidance. And that was the only way, because emails wasn't doing it. I don't know if you remember Power DMS, which sign for policies that are sent out electronically. That doesn't do anything as far as communication. So we started this weekly town hall. Well, once COVID ended, I wanted to continue the town hall from a safety and security standpoint. So even through today, tomorrow at 1:00 on a Thursday, we have a safety and security town hall that has a start time at 1, a mandatory end time at 2, and we post an agenda, and they're recorded for people who miss them. But the expectation from our administration has been that someone from each school will participate, because far too often, I think across the United States, what we see is safety and security is an annual thing that you do at the beginning of the school year before school year starts. You check the block and move on. So the idea, this is not a groundbreaking idea to do a town hall, but it's an idea that we all need to share because it may work for 3 other schools in another state somewhere. And now 3 other schools, their security has been enhanced because their security director is standing in front of them, or standing in front of them on a regular basis. I think that's the value of an organization like this, because even with all the publications, the LinkedIn and the podcasting and things like that, there's not a lot of discussion about lessons learned as it relates to the implementation of strategies in the K-12 space. And there's a number of different reasons for that. I listened, as we talked about earlier, I listened to a lot of those those discussions in your last couple of podcasts about fundamentals in school safety and security. And we're going to argue about what those fundamentals are. But in the end, many of the fundamentals are, they're not expensive to do, but together they become very expensive. And with very limited budgets, we have to be resourceful in the systems that we put together in hopes that we can get to a more unified enterprise system. Great example would be, yes, the technology exists to where we can have a weapons detection on a camera. It can go into a map. We can follow the individual all across the school. We can use electronic door locks to lock doors, to corridors and things like that automatically. We can have all these things that are integrated. But the simple truth is if we don't start with the idea that we have to have cameras on the outside of our buildings, and somebody has to have access inside the schools to watch those cameras, and those cameras have to be up to date, technologically up to date. They have to have the ability to, what's your VMS recording system? You have to have the ability to scan somebody into your building, showing an ID or something along those lines, or buzz them into the building. So you have to have cameras to begin with before we start putting on appliances. Then we have to figure out, okay, well, let's look at our building. How are my doors numbered? Are my doors numbered utilizing the National Incident Management System strategy of, one is your front door and everything is to the left? And did we number them in big enough signs that they can be seen from the street? Then did we number them inside? Well, in our school system, the average school has 42 doors. So we've got to pay for those metal signs, and then we got to pay somebody to hang them. And that's expensive, but it needs to be done. So before we go talking about all these wonderful technologies that are out there, there has to be some basics that I am I'm a big proponent of mastering the fundamentals. And that's from policy creation and procedures down to the things that we should all have, inviting our police departments to do walkthroughs of our schools. As a police commander like you, one of the things that I did was gave my guys an order that, within 6 months, I want you to visit every school and do a walkthrough with the SROs. Does that happen in other places? I don't know. Does your law enforcement or 911 center have video access to your cameras during crisis? Doesn't have to be all the time, but during crisis. Those are law enforcement access to your magnetic door locks on a 24-hour basis. Those are the things that I believe are fundamental, that I think we can share across the United States, that likely need to be put in place prior to us looking at these larger enterprise systems that there may be one-time funding for. But that continued funding becomes extremely challenging, especially when you add one thing onto another thing onto another thing. And our funding isn't going up, it wouldn't seem.
No. Well, and I'll tell you, from a for-profit business perspective, schools are going to struggle for funding in the next couple of years because they got used to COVID money, right? And that's going to be taken away from them this year, I think.
Well, and the economy's stagnating. And inflation is going higher. And name me a jurisdiction that has citizens that are like, take more of my money.
Money, right? There seems to be some in California, but but I get it. But like you said, we're gonna talk about fundamentals, and I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said. I will say this: we know that, as an example, video cameras don't prevent anything, right? If they did, we would have no armed robberies at banks or casinos or what have you. They don't prevent anything. And do they make the school safer than one without? Maybe. We could argue either way. I don't think they do. I see you shaking your head. I don't think they do, but maybe a smidge. And when we look at some systems, the ability to door locks, VMS, video management systems, videos, access control, all of these things are great. Don't get me wrong. A lot of them are very expensive, but almost none of them allow you to notify the entire campus. None of them allow you to go directly to law enforcement, fire departments, hospitals. None of them do that, right? So if we are appropriately planning for failure, which we should be, then having the ability to get notification and help to you, and we can argue about how we do that, is paramount. And it's a lot cheaper than putting magnetic locks on doors. It can be very expensive as well. And some of the mandates are very expensive. So I think you're right. I think the school should be driving that. But we look at, what can I do tomorrow if this failure occurs? Active shooter, fire, some sort of malfunction in their the systems, a hazmat spill, medical emergency, huge gang fight, and so forth. If we can significantly reduce the response time during a failure point, then work on all of this other stuff as we go, then I think we're ahead of the game there. And I do think there are systems that you can start very low and start building upon them. Here's one of the problems that we have as being in the business, right? Is when we get an RFP from the school, and the schools are driving this RFP, they want the entire world and they want it up and running by tomorrow. And frankly, there is zero company out there that can do everything. There are few companies that can integrate with enough systems to really have a solid package. And none of those companies can get you up and running tomorrow. And I will say this, regardless of the technology, first of all, we always work off of redundancy. So we have multiple ways to do things. But technology generally is cheaper than hardware. So when you start putting in hardware, then that ups your labor costs and those types of things. And I'm not advocating not to do hardware. I think hardware is necessary. But I think when we start talking about limited funding and finances and sustainability, frankly, we've had this discussion before, you and I, Jason, about grants and so forth. Grants are inherently designed to be seed money to get you started. And the intent is, we're going to give you 3, 4, 5 years, whatever that, it's usually for right around 3 years, because they feel, the grantors feel that should be a sufficient amount of time for you to figure out your budget to make that sustainable. And oftentimes they're not doing that. So they buy it, they implement it, and then 3 years comes pretty quick, and they go, oh no, we got this system. How are we going to keep it running? How do we get it an update? Or we're going to let it run until it fails. And that's not a plan either, right? So there's maintenance on everything. And, those are some of the things that I see as a struggle. And I certainly believe that if a school is starting from zero, well, let's talk about that real quick. Unless you want to respond, you can do both, I guess. The pathway to school safety.
So I think this is one of the things that's absolutely great about sitting down and having conversations with other professionals that have worked in this space, that are in this space, that want to be in this space, because one of the things that we do disagree on is, or we agree on, is the redundancy in that onion principle of security, right? The one thing and you can sit down with 15 different school safety directors from all across the country. And we all disagree on what those different layers look like and the things that all integrate with them. And I think that, and the part about that I truly enjoy, and even with inside of our own organization, when we have these conversations, we can have professional discussions, and there's always something that we can walk away with, because you hope that we've all been doing this long enough to know that we're not that expert that's at the plateau of their knowledge, that we're all still absorbing things. And there's always a different way to look at things. And I like the way that you framed what you said, and I have not heard that framing before. My pushback on some of what you said, or the rhetorical piece to some of the things that you said, is that we know that a vast majority of school districts in the United States don't have any one person that's leading safety and security across their organization. So the person who's driving that RFP may or may not be it's likely not the person who it's IT or it's purchasing or whatever else. And that's a problem to begin with.
100% agree with that.
But ultimately, when it boils down to, if we look at school safety from a pyramid structure, if we don't have good foundations, no matter what we put on top of that pyramid, it's not going to work. And that's where I'm going to sit. That's where I really want to stake the flag for my beliefs, is the idea that policy and procedure, strong relationships, well-trained staff and student body through drills and through open communication. And then and one of the things that, we look at those assessments, and one of the things that's not talked about in that assessment model, which will lead us into that pathway to safer schools, is what do we currently have that we are either underutilizing or we forgot that we had. A great example of this is the commonality of having a phone in your classroom. There should be a phone in every classroom. Why? Because the old buttons that are in most of our schools, I heard the other day, the average school is 50 years old. I don't know where that data comes from, but okay, we'll repeat it and use it. Mm-hmm. If the average school is 50 years old, many of the infrastructure pieces, like the buttons that they push to have the call buttons they don't work anymore. So how do we replace those? That's a normal everyday operation for a school. I want to have things that are used every day. That way, when a crisis occurs, people aren't like, "Uh-oh, what just happened? What do I have or don't I have?" We have to. I had a question the other day about, well, do you guys have a text messaging system that puts out mass notifications to everybody for school safety and security purposes? And my response was no, because we don't use it every day. So you are used to receiving communications from your school as a student or a staff member through our learning management system and through our social media pages and through our emails that we put out. So during a crisis, why would I add something that you don't use every day? That doesn't seem to make sense. That seems to be a point of failure that you talked about. So I want to look at all of the things that my school currently has. We were contacted by a vendor the other day that had all these different products that we could put into one enterprise system. Sounds great, but I got to be able to bring all those people to the table. And quite frankly, when we started talking, we're like, oh, we forgot we even had that piece. Or wait, this piece, we already have a contract with this organization that now has the capability to do something else that we contracted with somebody else with, that wasted taxpayer funding. And I think when we really drive down into schools, what we find is that they purchase programs, technologies, and things like that. And just like what your organization does, you probably have all kinds of tentacles that go everywhere and all kinds of partners. Well, somebody's got a relationship with you, and then somebody goes, you know what? We have to replace our existing video management system. So let's RFP it. But maybe your organization, who they've already had an existing relationship with, an existing contract that you can get a better price at, and you've already got the infrastructure set forth. Nobody knew from IT that Crisis Go had that capability, but the safety and security guy did. So IT went out and found something else on their own. And I think there's a lot of bureaucratic issues that we're fighting there, but understanding what we have and what we use every day in non-crisis events is highly important and can drive us to those technological solutions. I think we also have to have an honest conversation about the fact that school safety technologies are not very old. We're still learning them. There's still failure points inside of them. And ultimately, as we both know, as being people that have responded to major events and ran incident management systems at the incident command level. Technology works until you absolutely need it. And that is something that when it comes to technology, that's getting better in 2024, but not 100%. And I think that what we really have to look at is mastering those fundamentals of what we're doing every day. I would love to have a Crisis Go product, a product that goes into, all the different partners that you have. But if I'm not every day utilizing my ability to pass messages along on a regular basis when we have minor incidents with inside of our schools utilizing the existing things that we have, I can add another mass notification system to it. It's still not going to get used. And I think that's where we really have to have some of those hard conversations. You mentioned video cameras. I do not disagree with you. Video cameras by themselves don't make things safer at all. However, what they are now is an appliance. So we can add all kinds of things to those video cameras. And what we find is, just like with our implementation of some of the stuff that we've done on our cameras, we find that our cameras are old. There's never been a preventive maintenance issue with them. The lenses are dirty. The technology's old. They're placed in the wrong spot. They're placed because of the wrong philosophies. There's environmental issues like shade to light, light to shade. There's all kinds of issues. So as it boils down to it, anything that you add to that appliance causes an escalation of commitment to your camera program. So yes, I can add gunshot detection technology to my cameras. So the old shot spotter model, now I can have it in my camera. I don't even have to buy another thing that's got a microphone on it. But if my cameras are in the wrong spot, that doesn't do me any good. If my cameras are old, I can't put it on it. And where I think we probably all need to have a much broader conversation about is how do we get, let's say 70% of the schools in the United States to have those fundamental principles, such as phones in their classrooms, numbers on their doors and windows, any type of a map, whether it's a digital map or even a PDF map, any type of a map, and how they are sharing what they have in existence now with their local first responders. Do we have Knox boxes? If not, why? And I don't think that, quite frankly, I don't think that happens because we are chasing tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, which increases our grant money, which then comes to just do something. Put something to make me feel better because I'm sending my baby to you every day. Your company gets that RFP that we want anything and everything on top of that, when in fact it doesn't integrate with anything. And then it's a short-term solution. And then what we find out is a number of products that are in this space, and we all know it. A number of these products that are in this space are unproven. There's lots and lots of things that are said that are there was just a report that was released requesting some investigations from the federal government about marketing claims that are false. All kinds of things that are going on in this space right now that lead to a lot of unregulated money, and we don't know what we already have, which is, I think, where we circle right back into the need to have somebody at the school, the coach at the school, managing this team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't disagree with, well, I do with some of the stuff, but fundamentally, I agree. But we also know that there are schools that don't have anything, and we have schools that have purchased these things, whether they were duped into it or legitimately are looking at it. The point being here is that there's a school safety director that can vet all of that stuff out, right? And I'll give you one of the things I disagree with, or I'll give you two real quick. The first is phones, for the most part, have been in schools for many years. And many schools, at least some of the ones that they've been taken out of because they're expensive. And here's what has happened. They were put into the schools so that teachers could be contacted directly by parents, by school administrators, by whomever. And what ended up happening is teachers did not want to be disturbed during their class. So they put the volume down, turn off the ringer, what have you, right? Is there a policy that says they shouldn't do that? Yes. Does anyone go around and check to see if they're doing that? No. And it only becomes an issue when it becomes an issue. And if you haven't seen this video on YouTube, you need to go find it. I don't know what the name of it is, but it's a mom and a dad sets a phone down on a coffee table or an end table and gives a phone number to their like 14, 15-year-old offspring. It was a couple, I think a boy and a girl, but I'm not sure. And they can't figure out how to use the phone because they've been with cell phones their entire life. Everything is digital. And in fact, my department required me to have a phone, a landline, a hard line. You know what kind of calls I got on that? The only phone calls I ever got for the last 10, 15 years of my existence in law enforcement, BAM calls. Hey, we want to talk to you about your house warranty, right?
How many times did the FOP call you to get more money?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But I'm just saying, what we're really saying here is not that far off of one another. It's really having somebody there that can say, I need to do this. I need to set the foundation, whatever you determine that foundation is, or first I need to find out foundationally, what do we have, right? And understand what it is that we do have, and how do I get to the next level most effectively, efficiently, and cost effectively, right? And how do I get there? And then work through that, as opposed to just dumping things on top of something, or looking at the mandate, whatever mandate's out there, looking at that mandate and saying, okay, I'm going to abide by this mandate, without understanding the intent of the mandate. And if you understand the intent of the mandate, then you shouldn't really have needed a mandate to begin with, right?
So I don't disagree. And as we talk specifically about these phones, I think the phones are it's a great microcosm to so many things inside of the school safety space. So what you're describing in my jurisdiction, we don't have issues with. I don't have people calling my parents, because with the Cisco phones that we have, the voice over IP phones that we have, we can design how they work. The technology is already there. However, technology runs our phones. Technology doesn't know anything about safety. I don't know how to talk technology. What I do know is that somebody has to come together and lead a conversation with, hey, look, we need phones in every one of our every one of our classrooms. Mm-hmm. So if we need phones in every one of our classrooms, who do we need to bring to the table? IT, teaching and learning, the principals, things like that. All right, what are those rules going to be? Well, if they're only rules, you're not going to talk during the classroom. You're not going to use them when you're supposed to be teaching. We're not going to give the phone numbers away. They can be programmed in such a way that allows those things from IT. That's IT is going to do that. The safety guy shouldn't be doing that. But I think what we're getting at, and we're talking about the same thing, is there has to be somebody that we have to, and I think it is a school safety and security director's job. One of those soft skill jobs is to drive the destruction of decision-making in silos, because we touch so many different things. So I know we've had conversations about, like, in our organization, I oversee staff and misconduct investigations. That's not something that you did, not something that maybe any other people are comfortable with. What it drives me to do is I have to interface every day with our HR department. So there's no silo there. When it comes to technology, our implementation of any of the AI stuff that we've done on our cameras, that implementation of that, the first thing I did was went to technology and said, you guys have to be on the weekly calls with this. What I found was that the IT side of the vendor and the IT side of our people, they can talk in a language that I can't talk in. And I don't necessarily need to be a part of that, but I have to oversee the entire project, because it may, if it is a safety and security solution. And that's where I think what we're saying is the same. And when we really boil it back to, hey, look, how do I decide what vendors or what products? Because there are a number of wonderful products. You will very seldomly hear me say with most of the well-known products in this space that they're bad products, or that they don't do what they're supposed to do. We may disagree in the way that they do their business, their customer service, or things like that, but the products themselves usually work as they're designed to do. I wrote an article for a periodical here not too long ago about the implementation of one of our programs. And what I didn't know was that this solution wasn't an out of the box solution, technological solution. It wasn't an out of box solution. It required a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of assessment, a tremendous amount of ongoing things that needed to be put into this to make sure that we were getting all of the bang for the buck, basically, for the way to put it. Through our implementation process and that project management, what we found was, hey, look, what this company said their product did, it worked. And it works as it's supposed to. However, because it's technology, it rides on other things. There's about 50 other things that need to be taken into consideration, and nobody's talking about that. And again, I think that's where NCSSD, this network of people, can come together and go, hey, I implemented Crisis Go on this, and this. What did you guys learn? What went right and what went wrong? We're talking about utilizing taxpayer money. We have to be fiduciarily responsible for that taxpayer money and making sure that we're taking everything that we have as far as we can within inside of those parameters. So I don't expect to call a vendor and to say, hey, tell me everything that's wrong with your product or everything that you've learned from your other implementations, because I may or may not get a right answer. What I can get, though, is from the other professionals in this profession that we're building all together and that we're trying to standardize and provide professional competency to, is I can pick up the phone and call Kelly and go, hey, you implemented Crisis Go. Tell me all about it. What did it do? What did it not do? What did you learn during your implementation? Even down to, so one of the solutions that we put in solutions and it required a server to attach to the piece that we were working on. Or our server fit in the rack. We provided all the information to a colleague of mine. They went with the same product. The server that this company provided didn't fit into their racks. Well, I would have never thought about that because I'm not an IT guy. I don't think that the vendor would have known that their server wasn't going to fit in their rack. You want to know who would? The IT people in that organization that should have been sitting at the table. And I don't know if they were or not, but I think that's where when we talk about the integration of school safety from a school level, from a district level, having a school safety director that quarterbacks and manages this team, and then those integrations with our good vendors, our ethical vendors that are out here for the right reasons to protect kids and our staffs and our buildings. I think that's where we're all talking with the same things.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I know we didn't give Ethan much time to talk here. He's probably okay with that. Maybe not. I agree. And I guess I would say this, and you touched on it just a little bit just now, is the safety director has to understand partnerships, policies, people, right? Systems. They have to understand what systems they're looking for and then bring people to the table. There are very few, and I tell this to everyone. I think Jason, I was an incident commander on an active shooter incident, and we had 250 cops show up at our incident.
Wow.
And there are very few agencies in the United States that can provide that kind of manpower on a moment's notice. And, we got people we didn't even want, right? But they're coming, right? Especially when you start in your area where you have, in, what do you call it? The DMV?
Yes.
What is that? To me, that's the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I would never want to be there.
This is the District, Maryland and Virginia. It's DMV.
I heard that the other day, and I just like,
yes.
Okay. They have a different law enforcement agency for everything. Mm-hmm. They Park Police, Capitol Police, Secret Service, FBI, all these different law enforcement agencies, and they're all coming, whether you want it or not. But understanding partnerships, if you look towards the more typical school and agencies, like we were considered a mid-sized sheriff's department in Southern California. We had 310 sworn deputies and another couple hundred sworn deputies in the jail. So we had 500 total, 2 different classifications. So the people in the jail couldn't come out and really assist us. They were just deputies in the jail. Any given day, we probably had 30-ish on patrol at any given time. And so understanding the need for partnerships and understanding the relationships, not only between people, but systems and processes and things like that is key to this position, right? And understanding where you're at, doing your assessments and trying to figure out that is absolutely paramount. And that's why I go back to this, what I said earlier is, first of all, standardizing that position it's a monumental task. I get it, because there's so many, even us that are saying, well, that I never did that.
Mm-hmm.
So trying to identify those core competencies and identifying those and the standards for those is going to be key for our success. And then if a school wants you to do misconduct investigations, that's upon them to teach you how to do that, because there's so much to do. I did misconduct for investigations and stuff for the sheriff's department, and then I dealt with the aftermath when I was in HR. So I know a fair amount of that. But there's so much liability in there, right? Especially when you're talking unions and so forth. But understanding that and having them at that level where they're talking to the superintendent and understanding, hey, director of IT, director of this, we need to get together. We're about ready to spend a bunch of money. And I like when you said, you guys, you didn't put it this way, but you're stewards of taxpayer money, right? You have a fiduciary responsibility to that, which a lot of people don't take seriously. And it is important that you understand that. And part of that is just having a plan, looking at, people are waiting for this mandate, and this kills me. We have a mandate of doing an assessment every 3 years. I'm going to wait till year 2.5 before I start looking at my new assessment. You should be doing assessments every day, walking by and saying, here's an issue. We're going to deal with this. If you have to then walk and do a formal one, okay, but that's not going to take anywhere near the amount of effort, manpower, cost. I know there's people out there that do this for a living, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. It's not rocket science, but it's a new language, and people have to understand what they're looking for. When is a door locked? What does that mean, right? But somebody who does contract assessments, that's expensive. And if I train you how to do it, you can do that pretty quick. But understanding that, and what kills me is people wait for mandates.
And I don't disagree. As you were talking about mandates earlier, you were talking about Alyssa's law, and how can your IT people? How do we expect them to know what that is, unless somebody like us is telling them what that is, to understand that mandate, to understand, how do we communicate with? How are we sending messages and getting instant communication with our public safety partners? So, we just did an assessment of a vendor for a mass communication system that we have on hand. And then as we started to look at it, a couple of things that we found was the only thing that they offered that we didn't already have was maybe a text messaging app. And then it becomes an issue of, not a text message, an app to receive notifications. But then it becomes a question of, well, wait, we don't use that every day. We have another company that we use, School Messenger, I think is who our organization uses, to send out all of it. And everybody's got their opinion on them too. But it doesn't matter. It works for what we need it for. And we already use that every day. So why do we need another app to utilize that?
I can tell you why, but
but at its foundation, now I have the discussion of, okay, well, tell me why I want to tell my parents exactly in the moment what's going on for them to rush our schools when the last place that I want them to be is there. When I can pass that message out that, hey, we in our organization, we have a single point reunification system. We don't use outside jurisdictions or outside buildings and things like that. And that's probably worth a whole nother discussion as well.
Sure.
But what are we currently using on a regular basis? And do we need to supplement it with something else? And there's, like, for example, let's just talk about the messaging piece. The messaging piece in our organization, and likely in many people's organization, doesn't come from school safety and security directly. It goes through the PIO's office or your communications team. So if your communications team, when they go to RFP, how they're going to message everyday events, if they don't know to contact the safety and security people to say, hey, what would you use during a regular crisis? Oh, well, we would use Crisis Go to communicate that way. Maybe they've got something that we can utilize on a daily basis to send it out there. And that way we have those redundant systems that we're utilizing every day. And let's face it, it takes almost every day to stay up on what new products all these vendors that are out there have to offer. And, I'm averaging 10 phone calls a day, and God bless the salespeople because they're making cold phone calls all day long. God bless them, because there's no way I could do it. But, when I'm getting 10 phone calls a day as the titled person who's a safety and security director, I know my superintendent's getting 20 phone calls a day because of all the other vendors. My facilities guys likely is I'm getting the same calls that sometimes my facility guy's getting. So we've got to figure out how to lasso all of that to make us better, because ultimately, as we've all talked about, this is all about our kids. It's all about our staff, and it's all about our schools and our communities. So, and add on top of that we're from the government and that we're funded by the government. People expect government to be better than it is. And we have an obligation to be a portion of that solution, not the bigger problem of it.
Okay, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I will say this, and then we can probably, we're getting a little bit long on this, but this is why one of the reasons I said we'll probably have multiples of these, Jason. But here's what I'm going to say. Capitalism is very strong in what's going to happen. And you're trying to lasso A-type personalities in an industry or a profession of sales, trying to get them to not call you. For a government to try to do that, it ain't going to happen, right? But it's what you do when you pick up that phone. Right. And I think that's where we have to stay in the lane and impact those things that we can impact, and really say, you know what? I've looked at your product. It's not for me. Right.
And one of the discussions that we've had is a class for school safety and security directors of how to interface with vendors, what questions to ask.
Yep.
And that's highly important, because I've had to learn it. And believe me, I want people to, well, not that I'm soliciting more phone calls or more emails, but what I will say is I enjoy talking to the vendors, because I need to learn all that's out there. That's part of my job, to research and to understand all those things. That is what we have to do. The problem is there are so many solutions from this side. There are so many solutions. I don't know everything that Crisis Go does. I don't know all the partners that Crisis Go has. I don't know if you guys can do things like, is your enterprise system allow you to monitor environmental conditions inside of rooms and buildings, and also on our refrigerators? And the only way I find that out is if I ask. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
So it is a love when it comes to the vendor integrate and learning what we're doing. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to lasso anything as far as that goes. What I'm trying to lasso is on our back end, making sure that we're all talking with inside the school, and nobody's driving that organically. It has to be driven from, in most cases, from the outside in. Yeah. And also, there's a whole nother part of NCSSD that we didn't talk about a lot today, is about business ethics, is about how, your product should stand on its own. I shouldn't need, as you talked about mandates, I shouldn't need government mandates to tell me which product I must have in my schools, and which product I must prioritize in my school, and which product I have to have, which specific vendor or vendors I have to use to meet that mandate. And that's where, as we talk about fundamentals, the exact thing about, okay, we have fundamentals. I may have a school that is located, if you look in my jurisdiction goes from very urban to very, very rural. 25-minute response time running priority. Our sheriff's office is the exact same size. The one that I retired from is the exact same size as you're talking about. So you probably had that rural school that was 25 minutes running priority to get to, that had 300 kids in it.
An hour.
Yeah, exactly. So
right.
So that school's security is likely to look completely different in certain aspects than the school that is right next to the police department.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the autonomy and the funding to be able to determine how we are the ones, being the professionals that do this job every day, align those priorities, not legislators, not vendors going to legislatures. That is where I have an issue with our vendor, not all of our vendors, because not all our vendors are doing that, but the vendor issue.
Yeah, no, I get it, but that's another herd of cattle
Correct.
with one cowboy and one lasso. That's and the way that you attack that is another herd of cattle, right?
Correct.
Is talk to the politicians, educate the politicians, but the problem with politics is politics, right? And when we're talking about educating, we want to educate our teachers, our educators, our administrators. We want to educate them on this as well, right? It's not just we're working on educating and professionalizing the school safety directors. We want to get into infusing safety and understanding and all of that, all to everybody, regardless of your position at the school, right? When we're talking about safety, there are people who have different responsibilities and expectations, but there is no one person on that team, that safety team, that is more important than the other one when it comes to identifying an incident, getting it started, and having the ability to trigger an alert or whatever, right? To solve that emergency. There's not one person having that. But with educators, politicians, we're talking about people who are turning over on a regular basis, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's going to be a huge challenge for us, but we're going to tackle that one as well. And before we get, Kayla's going to kill us on this one. She's the one that does our editing. But let's have another one of these. Let's talk. And it was great having you, Ethan. Before we go, is there anything burning in your little heart that you just have to ask? And if you say it's not.
There's a couple. It's going to lead to another
long discussion
for another, but maybe I'll end it. I'll ask the question. Maybe it's just something you ask, you go into more detail in the next one.
Okay.
But,
yeah. What's our next topic going to be, Ethan?
If I'm thinking from the school perspective, let's say you're someone who's you have the responsibilities of what we're calling a school safety director on someone else. You have it on your IT guy or whatever, and it may be for some reasons just because that's the guy you think that's going to do the best job, or probably what I think is probably more often happening just based off of what we're hearing is probably just money, funds. Like, why do I need to go out and add another employee and add that to the bottom line? Like, why can't I just take what you're creating and say, hey, IT guy, I need you to learn all these other things that are coming down the pipeline that I'm hearing from this.
I'll give you a 30-second, honestly, a 30-second.
All right, I'm going to time you.
It is with the cost of liability and the safety of our children. It's worth the I don't care how much money you're paying. It's worth the extra money to have somebody who's solely responsible for directing that. And I say directing it, right? Managing it, going, and all that entails. And if you want to expose yourself to risk and liability, give it to somebody who has no idea what they're doing. Especially, you hear me say this all the time, especially in the state that we're at right now, we're 25 years past Columbine. There's an expectation of what safety is, and we're not necessarily 100% successful there.
And what I'll add to your answer is the money already exists. Every state has school safety and security money. The federal government has school safety and security money via a couple different grants that they have. The money exists. The problem is that the money may not exist for personnel. The money may not exist for that mandate that we're talking about to have a school safety and security director. It just needs to be redirected. One of the things that our organization is said over and over and over again, we're not asking for extra money. Just redirect some of that money. redirect some of that money to cover either some or partial salaries for a school safety director. And some states have it. Some states have the ability to do that, but most do not.
Yeah. We'll delve into that. Why? We'll delve into that. That'll be a good topic.
I think you guys have talked about a lot of different things you can like piece out into like much. It's like all super great stuff. So it's definitely a jam-packed episode that I want to dissect a little bit more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. So we'll Jason and I will talk. We'll get some stuff together. He's coming up on the end of his school year, so we'll have to figure out. I think he gets like 3.
I work 12 months.
I think he gets like 3 months off.
Yeah, right? No, there's no 3 months off for me. Are you kidding me? There's some the only good part I got in there is there's some travel. So that's about it.
Yeah, when I was working for the district, I would go in and all these educators were on 10-month contracts, right? And I would walk into my district office and I would literally be the only one there.
That's when you get your best work done now.
Right. All right, Jason, thank you so much. We'll talk. Obviously, we'll talk more than just the next podcast because we have lots of work to do. Ethan, thank you. And
thank you.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity again. I look forward to next time.
Yep.
Ethan, it was nice meeting you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety. You too.